Did you know that for centuries people were getting insanely rich by trading literal roadkill? Well, if you're not a fan of that kind of thing, then I have some good news for you. This is a story of adventure, of intrigue, of merchants and monsters. It's the story of the Silk Road. The Silk Road was one of the largest and most profitable trade routes in history. The route stretched over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean and helped spread ideas, goods, and innovations across 3 continents. But while it's called the Silk Road, silk was just one of many valuable commodities that were traded along its length. And the idea that it was called the Silk Road because it was made of silk is an idea so bad it hasn't even been around for 100 years. Instead, the name comes from a 19th-century German scholar who was basically just trying to come up with something that sounded cool to describe all these crazy stories he'd heard about exotic Eastern goods. That being said, silk was definitely a big deal. For much of human history, it was one of the most luxurious fabrics in the world. After all, making it required a special kind of worm that only lived in China. So Chinese silk was incredibly rare and valuable in places like India and Europe. But silk wasn't the only thing that moved along the Silk Road. There was also jade, porcelain, gunpowder, paper, and many other goods that were produced in China, India, and Persia. These included things that were considered necessities like horses and camels, but also luxuries like spices and ivory. To move all this stuff, merchants would use the pack animals, mostly horses, elephants, and camels, which would carry goods from town to town. Along the way, they'd stop at inns that catered to travelers and provided food and lodging. But sometimes they wouldn't stop at those inns. Sometimes they'd stop at roadside shacks where fortune-tellers, beggars, and criminals gathered, hoping to make a quick buck by relieving passing merchants of their valuables. And these weren't just your run-of-the-mill highwaymen either. Some of the groups that preyed on Silk Road travelers were entire organized armies of bandits. But despite these dangers, the rewards were great enough that many merchants were willing to brave the elements and the occasional marauder. For example, one Chinese merchant recorded that in one year his party traveled over 8,000 miles, crossed 18 mountain ranges and 36 rivers, and slept outdoors more than 100 nights. During that trip, they sold over 20 tons of goods. And after deducting expenses, each team member received 150% profit on their investment. That being said, traveling along the Silk Road wasn't exactly safe, easy, or comfortable. Merchants often had to deal with extreme heat, cold, bandits, wild animals, and shifting sands, not to mention the occasional war that would erupt between the various empires that dotted the Silk Road. In fact, there were so many conflicts along the route that in 129, one Chinese emperor even had to send out an armed escort to protect merchants from bandits. Despite these difficulties, the Silk Road remained profitable for centuries. And although we think of it as a single road, it was really more of a network of routes. There were several different routes that connected east and west, and new ones were always being developed as technology improved and new goods came on the market. Unfortunately, by the 15th century, the Silk Road started to fall apart. The major European trading companies had found new sea routes to Asia and China, and the Ottoman Empire was starting to collapse, which cut off trade between the East and West. But though the Silk Road was never quite abandoned, it did fall into disuse for quite a while. In fact, it wasn't until 2009 that a group of archaeologists discovered well-preserved remains of a 2,000-year-old Silk Road fort along the route in northwest China. They found everything from ancient coins to old Buddhist statues to scraps of silk. And it's thanks to discoveries like this that the Silk Road is finally getting the attention it deserves. The historic trade route is currently a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and archaeologists are still uncovering important artifacts from its many eras. Now check out what was life like in ancient China, or watch this video instead.